Welcome to the Jeff Knows Inc. Entrepreneurial Podcast with your host, Jeff Lopes. Jeff has over 2 decades experience as a serial entrepreneur, building brands like Kimura from his home basement to a multi-million-dollar global brand that has sold over 250,000 pairs of boxing gloves. Jeff's here to educate, guide, and drive you on the process of bringing your ideas and dreams to reality with the inspiring stories from some of the top business minds.
Welcome to episode 79 of the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited to have on today Brian Bogert. Brian is a human performance and human behavior coach. One of the best conversations, hands down, we've had on this podcast. Great individual. Someone I truly believe will be a lifetime friend. Sit back, everyone, and enjoy a great conversation with Brian. We are live on the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited to have on today Brian Bogert. Did I get that right?
You got it right, brother.
I love this, man. We have had about a 20, 30-minute conversation before we went live, and great story, great inspiration, great connection. I'm excited to have you on. Thank you for coming on, brother.
Hey, man, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for building a platform for us to be together.
I love it. How I always start off my podcast is I do a quick little rundown, and I let the guests just allow the audience to know where they are currently and what they're currently doing with their career. And then we just take the conversation and start flowing. So what are you currently doing career-wise, and give us a little rundown on where you are in your life?
Yeah, so I'm definitely in an impact phase of my life, focusing really as a human behavior performance coach and speaker on helping change lives. I know that sounds overly broad and simplistic. There's a whole lot that's to that, all right? I believe a lot in helping people become more aware and more intentional so they can get back to who they already are, their most authentic selves at the core. I think that's when magic happens and perspective, motivation, and direction can start entering into people's lives, and when they can also start experiencing joy, freedom, and fulfillment. So I'm in the impact phase of my life, man, and I'm doing everything I possibly can over the next 25 years to impact 1 billion lives. And it's going to be a fun run.
I love it. So let's give it a little rundown. Where were you when you actually started into this actually performance and self-help coach and all that? When did you actually apply this into your life, and when did you just all start?
Yeah, it was about 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago or so, formally. I'll tell you the informal piece in a minute, but formally about 6.5 years ago, I was always one of those that said, look, everything that I do is for the benefit of my family. And, as we were building and scaling our last business, it was a huge time intensive thing. We had kids, 6 months went by, and all of a sudden I fortunately was awake enough to realize that I missed the first 6 months with my son. I was there for the first week, and I just never really recalibrated my life beyond that. Yeah. Doing everything for my family, if I'm not there, really doesn't mean a whole lot, right? And so it was the first time in my life that I didn't feel like I had the skill set or the intellect or the people in my life to help figure this out. And so I started seeking to hire a coach, interviewed a whole bunch of them, frankly, a lot of them that were an inch deep and a mile wide, didn't have the relevance or credibility to get me where I wanted to be. But I finally landed with one. And literally, it was the first call we had. He said, Bogert, you got to be doing this. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, you need to be coaching and speaking. I was like, yeah, whatever. Right. And I'll spare the expletives for your show. But I basically told him hey, man, I'm paying you a lot of money, not to tell me how great I am, but to help me figure these other things out. Don't not add more to my plate. And he just said, okay. And he trickled it. Literally every time we talked, every single month for about 9 months. And then the universe sent me a sign that was like, look, you have to do this. And so when I realized, and I could answer the question if it was complementary or conflicting in what was going on in my life, when I realized it was complementary, I jumped in with both feet with no intent, frankly, to take it to where I'm at today. It was just a passion project on the side, but he tapped into it. He's like, look, with your personal story, with your professional story, with your intuition, your emotional intelligence, and your ability to literally help build people and organizations. He said, you have to be doing this. You do it already. You just don't get paid for it. And so, I leaned in, and it's been a really fun journey since.
I love that. So prior to this, what were you doing business-wise? You said you scaled out your business.
Yeah, I spent 15 years in risk management, employee benefits consulting. The last 10 was with a large entity that was basically a series of LLCs. Okay. So we ended up coming in. I was there for 10 years. And in that time, we scaled it from $250,000 to over 15 million. It was 2 of us. And by the time I left, there was over 60 of us. So really, really fun run. Learned a whole lot about growing and scaling businesses, leadership, all that stuff. So good time though, but it wasn't for me, right? Long term.
Yeah, 100%. So with your business, what are you currently offering? Obviously, you offer your coaching. Do you do group sessions as well and all that stuff like that?
We do. We don't have the regular rotation on certain things. We do group coaching. We do self-led coaching. We also work with organizations on very specific and niched group coaching to get teams of people onto the right path. And then obviously I do a lot of speaking and a lot of podcasts and things that create there. And I create a lot of free content, right? So reality of it is if I want to impact 1 billion lives, I'm really, really aware that 99.99999% will never pay me $1. I'm like very aware of that, very okay with that. So there's a lot of free content that gets produced as well that takes up a segment of time, and just really looking for ways to impact lives. But it's really a combination of speaking, coaching, in a variety of ways.
I love that you said that. For the last, a little niche about myself, for the last 3 years, I've taken 64 young entrepreneurs, very young entrepreneurs. I try to take them under 25 or under 30 at least. And I've taken them under my wing and I've coached them, gathered them, grown with them. And a few of them are already past 7 figures and I've never charged a penny. It's been just my way of kind of giving back and seeing it. And in a selfish way is it's been able to allow myself the ability to learn how to manage and coach different personalities, which I appreciate as well. Right. And I think it's very valuable to deal with. So you have this incredible, inspiring story. Let's start off with your story, if you're okay with the talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. Let's go.
Start off with your story when you were young and you're
told it.
Okay. Let's just talk about it. Let's talk about your story when it all started and how it affected you and impacted you, your family at a young age. You were 7 years old.
I was 7. Yep.
Okay. Let's talk about it.
So if everybody will just bear with me for 1 second, unless you're driving, please close your eyes. Just close your eyes for 1 second. I'll tell you when to open them. Imagine going to a store, having a successful shopping trip, walking back out to the car, getting ready to go on with your life, turning your head, seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. Go ahead and open your eyes, because that's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart. We got a 1-inch paintbrush, and we were headed back to the car. I always had an excitement and vigor for life, so no surprise I was the first one there, and this was back in the days before there was key fobs, so I had to literally wait for my mom to catch up, stick the key in the door, turn it to unlock it so I could get in. And as I was waiting there, a truck pulled up in front of the store. Driver and middle passenger got out, and the passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do. He scooted over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. Now we're in an end spot, so we went up and over the median in the end spot, went up over the tree in the end spot, hit our car, knocked me down, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So there I am, laying on the parking lot, 115-degree day in Phoenix. My mom and brother just watched the entire thing. My arm is now 10 feet away. And fortunately for me, my guardian angel also saw the whole thing happen. There was a nurse that walked out of the store right when it took place, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her and rushed immediately into action. She came over and stopped the bleeding on the main wound and saved my life. And she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my arm on ice within minutes. Had she not done one or both of those things, Jeff, I either wouldn't be here with you today or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump. I'm going to expedite a whole variety of the rest of the story, because clearly I'm here happy, healthy, and productive living with you today, right?
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of listeners and people were not expecting it to go there today. You know I have a very, very unique story. Yeah. But what I've also learned in all this time of doing this is that we all have unique stories. What's important is that we have to pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from our stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. So I'm going to share with you 2, and then we can unpack some of the other things like impact on family and stuff that was layered into that question. Yeah. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it.
Exactly.
And then the second, I didn't realize until far later, right? I was in a fog legitimately from 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. I was in a fog. I knew what was happening to me. I knew what I was going through. I knew what the recovery process was, but I didn't have to think about the details or guide myself through it. My parents were doing a lot of that heavy lifting for me. You know, the reality of it is they saw very, very intimately. And this is what I told you before. You and I connected on a deep level because I see my parents in you.
Yeah.
My parents, the idea of seeing their son grow up with the use of his left arm was a source of great suffering for them. So they literally willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, to do what was tough, to literally embrace the pain, to ultimately strengthen and heal me. So whether it was intentional or not, they ingrained in me a philosophy and a way of living. And you do this, you've done this in your own life, right? They taught me to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And when done right, that's also where we get to gain freedom.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So fast forward now a couple of years through your recovery and all that stuff. When, with the recovery process, and I don't know if it's something you talk about or not, but first off, mobility wise, how's the mobility with your arm and all that stuff like that?
I have full functional use of it, full practical use. I don't have a tricep on my left arm. My bicep is my gracilis from my leg. It's obviously smaller. It's 4 inches shorter. I don't have a lat on the left side of my back, right? So there are some things like and I'll just do it, right? If I raise it over my head, guess what? Gravity takes over. It will fall, right? But if I extend my arm here, I have full practical use. So I can still extend it. I've learned how to adapt my body to work for me. And that's why I say full practical use. Legitimately, one of the few things I struggle with, I can do it, but I struggle a lot, is cutting steak. I don't have a tricep. I have to literally, I have to contort my arm and body in such a way to do it. Outside of that, man, it doesn't really hold me back from stuff.
So your parents right now, are your parents still with us?
They are. Yeah.
How proud are they of you?
You know,
because I'm asking that because I look at my son every day and I don't know how your parents were, but this is something where I gravitate to them. I express that on a regular daily basis, how proud I am of him. And every time he accomplishes them, I make sure he understands how proud I am of him, because that, I think, gives him even more willpower to do more.
Yeah.
Because he wants to make me proud.
Double down on that, because I couldn't agree with you more. I believe my parents are very proud, and they've told me many, many times.
Okay.
I think they're also proud of themselves, right? Because this type of trauma literally shreds marriages, right? Many of them end in divorce. Many of them aren't successful. Many kids wouldn't actually recover to the level that I had. And frankly, I wouldn't have been able to do it without my parents. So I think they're very, very proud. You know, I think about often, right? And as a father, I understand this now. I shared with you, I've got 2 special needs kids as well. So I get this on a different level now than I probably ever did. But this idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his arm was a source of great suffering. Yeah. And them embracing the pain, I've often looked back on and I've wondered, like, do they regret it? Do they appreciate it? Do they enjoy it? Right. And not because they don't talk to me about it, but it's a hard lens, right? Like, that's a lot they went through for my benefit. Yeah. And it's really clear to me now, right? When my 5-year-old daughter runs across the room and they see me literally pick her up and raise her up above my head, despite the fact I don't have a tricep, for her to elicit that wild little laugh, like, I know that they're not just avoiding suffering, like, they're actually experiencing great joy. And I know I do. And so the thing is, I see it. I see it in their faces. I see it in their reactions. I see it in how they interact with my kids. And they do tell me they're proud. But I think it's shifting at this point in their life to not just proud of me, but also proud of themselves for what they were able to help mold me into through their hard effort.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's an angle for my story is I've never looked at it in that direction as a parent, because it's always a direction of, we're always so proud of what he's accomplished. So I never look at it. To me, as a parent, it shouldn't be something where I should be proud of myself. That's my mindset. It's something that it's a duty of mine. This is my
I agree.
Right. Yeah.
But that's also because he's in your life every single day. When I say I think they can do it now.
Oh, no, I'm saying that might be
for 20 years.
Oh, 100%. So that exactly what I meant is that might be a situation where I transform later on and I sit back and
I think it will be, because I think it will be, because the reality of it is, again, I said this to you, like, you embrace the pain every single day to make sure that he's got the best opportunity to live a successful, healthy life. Yeah. And you're doing the work just like I do with my kids, just like they did. They were so in it. I don't think they ever had a chance to take a step back. That's why I answered the way I did, because I just think it's really interesting. 20 years removed, I think they've got a lot of pride in what they were able to do. Yeah. Combined now with, they're still very proud of me, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I always say this, Brian, is I look at my son and And there's so many stories that he's been through, so many moments that, and I believe there's so many other moments he's still going to go through inspirational wise that I look at him and I tell him on a regular basis, I go, I'm the reason I'm taking this path right now with the coaching and getting on stages and doing all this, I didn't have to do that. I'm doing that because one, I love giving back and helping, but two, I want to be able to stand on stage with you when you're 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, and I want to see you inspire the world through your story.
Yes.
And I actually do. And this one thing we do as parents is a lot of children, and I'm sure you went through this when you were younger, learn to embrace fear. What I mean by that is their fear of rejection, their fear of what their peers are going to say, their fear of how people react to them. And that was one thing as a parent when I looked at my son and thinking, okay, you're going to go to school wearing these big braces on your legs. You're going to be wearing glasses. You're already quite a few years behind on your speech and therapy. And when you go to school, kids are mean. So I had to toughen them up mentally. I did it on a regular basis. I toughened them up in the way where don't give a shit what people think. Be yourself, be who you are. Don't hide your braces, wear shorts. And that was one thing from day one we instilled with him. And one thing, even with my daughter, is we do on a regular basis, almost like every month, every 6 weeks, we find something our kids have a fear of. And as a family, we embrace it together, whether it's public speaking, whether it's jumping off something, we do that together because I think fear is something that is not born with us. Fear is something that's taught to us. And you always hear those sayings where you hear your parents echo in the back of your ear, don't touch the stove, you're going to burn your hand. Don't run down the stairs, you're going to fall. So I think as parents, and I think that's one thing your parents probably did as well, is break that fear. So you could go out and conquer the world and not have that fear built in from a young age, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I often say that fear is fabricated and all the greatest things 100%. In life are just on the other side of fear. Yeah. Right. And so we use that in our household as well. And we do those same types of things to push through. I'll tell you, listening to you, I'm going to say this because I actually, although you didn't say it, I believe that this is happening. Yeah. And so I want to draw attention to it. And if it's not happening, then hopefully you hear what I say, because I think it's really important. To my detriment, I got so good at owning all of those things that I actually created an external narrative that was all intellectually based, all mental toughness. That was literally, I'm good, I'm strong, I'm capable, I can do anything, and I don't need your help. Like, don't feel sorry for me, right? Yeah. Now, it served me really, really well because it allowed me to move through this. It allowed me to do those things, but it bit me one day. Interesting. It actually bit me twice. Okay. And they happened in two different periods. The first was when I was 20, I went down snowboarding, re-broke my arm, compound fracture. All of a sudden, I'm there as a 20-year-old with my arm hanging by my side. Went 10 months with it hanging there because 7 surgeons were afraid to touch me. And I didn't have my family like I did once, right? And what I realized is the power of our narratives. Because it's not that I didn't have great friends. It's not that they didn't love me. It's not that they didn't care about me. There was 2 people who showed up. And the other people I'm not upset about, I don't vilify. They didn't show up because they bought into my narrative, the one I created. And all of a sudden I was there alone and vulnerable. And they bought into my narrative so strong that they were like, Brian's good. He's strong. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need our help. And I didn't have the courage at the time to ask for it. The secondary piece that bit me, and I didn't realize this again until far later. Yeah. I had some other health stuff that was going on a few years ago. I won't bore you with the details, but it allowed me to go down this whole different path of understanding. Again, another thing that knocked me down, another thing that gave me perspective. And a few years ago, I'm laying on the couch with my daughter. We'd just been playing, having all this fun. She wraps her arm around me. And she leans over, kisses me and says, Daddy, I love you. And I just broke down in tears. Now, I don't typically express my emotion in tears. So it caught me off guard because I was like, literally, it was coming from joy. Okay. So after my snowboarding injury, I focused on human connection, vulnerability, authenticity, like those types of things. This next period was like, wait, if I'm not experiencing joy this way, I'm also not experiencing pain this way or anything in between. What I didn't realize, Jeff, is that when I shut off physical pain, when I went mental, when I created that narrative, when I know these things, I also shut off emotional pain, emotional resilience, emotional understanding, how to actually navigate through those things. And now I've got a completely different lens on it. So again, I believe you're actually doing this based on our little bit of conversation. Yeah. So again, this isn't attached to you, but I want to make sure that people hear making him mentally tough to go in and do the things that you described is only half the equation.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And because I used to believe that mental toughness is all we needed. If we set our mind to it, we can do it. And oh, by the way, that's unbelievably important in the equation. But the ones that truly unlock, the ones that truly live limitless, the ones that truly go to the next level and reach their potential are the ones that understand intellect and emotion, the mind-body connection, the narratives that both create, and how to regulate and balance between the two and which one to trust in the right situation. And so it's not just mental toughness. It's also emotional maturity, emotional resilience, emotional understanding, and the connection of the two, which I have every reason to believe in our little bit of time together, you're teaching that to your kids.
Yeah. And I'm honest, the way you broke it down, I guess I've never put a full thought process on that. And I love that aspect of it because the day you die is the day you stop learning, right? So you're always learning, right, understanding, educating yourself. And I guess I do that subconsciously because there's a lot of things, and we talked before how sweet and how caring my son is, gives me kids. He has a very emotional side. And as a father, I am not scared of showing them my emotion. I've cried in front of my kids so many times.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
And little things we've done to, even as a young kid, and it's funny you're saying this because even at like 6 years old, he was just very like, no matter what, he would get to school and he would have to be the first to do everything. Like so we wanted to break that emotional connection as well. And it's funny because we adopted something like bringing dogs to our house and having,
yes,
he has his own pet and he's kissing and always, and that he's taking care, learning how to take care and nurture something. So I get that aspect. I never thought about it in that way, but I guess we are already implying that. And it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel. So yeah. I love that part of it.
And by the way, if kids are mean and they're beating you up, guess what? It's okay to feel that.
Oh, 100%.
It's okay to feel isolated. It's okay to feel lonely. It's okay to feel like lack of human connection. It's like, those are real emotions.
100%. So
and, and again, when I say all that, my parents did a phenomenal job with me holistically. So this is not in any way to say that they did something wrong here. Not at all. We were just unaware of it. We were right. But when emotions started coming back in, I also started to realize how actively, but also more passively, I actually suppressed emotions and didn't pay attention to them because it was how I survived. Right. I think he's going to be in a way better position because of how you guys are approaching this than I was. But again, that's not to do with my parents. It's just the dynamic of the time and evolution and change and growth. But that's what I wanted the listeners to hear is it's not just mentally preparing, emotionally prepare too, and connect the two.
Yeah, I love that part. How long have you been married now for?
10 years. We just celebrated 10 years in December. We've been together for 14.
14, yeah. I just passed 17. We were together for 24.
Congrats.
How old are you, mind me asking?
Say that again?
How old are you?
I'm 35.
35, yeah. You're 7 years younger than me. You just had your birthday. What was it, December?
Last July. Yeah.
Oh, July. Okay, very, very cool. So are you okay with diving into your children now? Talking about your children?
Yeah, we can dive into whatever.
So before we went on air, we went through, obviously I told you my story of my son and you discussed a little bit about your children. And they both obviously, there's issues that you're working through and working with. Do you want to dive into that? And let's talk about as a parent and the effort and the mindset of you and your wife and how you guys work together and connect. I think these are all important lessons we could probably learn here.
Yeah. And I mean, as I'm sure you can appreciate, like this is way too deep of a topic to cover holistically.
100%.
We'll hit on the high points.
Yeah.
So my son, who is going to be 7 in February, we discovered probably around the time he was 3, he was having sensory issues and a whole bunch of variety of different things. So he originally got diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, which led us to a whole different path of understanding. And he is on the autism spectrum, highly functioning, but also pretty severe on the autism spectrum, and ADHD. And that comes with a whole bunch of complexity in his non-neurotypical way that he operates in the world, nonverbals, human connection, interaction, emotions. But anxiety is also a really big thing that manifests for kids. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest misunderstandings often with kids that are on the spectrum is that people think it's just bad behavior. It's literally like it's non-neurotypical wiring in the way that they might present. And it's typically anxiety based, not always. Yeah. I don't want to speak like holistically. That's how we've experienced it. And so there's a whole lot there, right? A whole lot.
Yeah.
My daughter, she's 5. We discovered right before she turned 4, right about 3.5, that she is hearing impaired in both ears. She's got 40% hearing loss in one ear, 60% in the other. It was around the time, right? Obviously talking and speech formation and things that we were starting to realize were a little different, but she passed all the newborn hearing screenings, right? So it's like, we didn't know. She was communicating, she was talking, she was, but when we started to find out how bad it was and we got some perspective, I mean, she was missing a lot. So, if we look at both kids, the way my wife and I look at all of these things is there an emotional piece in how you first process this when you realize these things about your kids? Of course. Right. And what it is often is grief, right? You're grieving the loss of the life that you envisioned for your kids. But there's a lot of parents that don't necessarily move past that, and it stays in that bucket, right?
Yeah.
So my wife and I, fortunately, she worked in as a child life specialist in the healthcare facility. So she's been around a lot of kids with terminal illnesses, different types of neurotypical, non-typical issues. You name it on the spectrum, she's experienced it. So fortunately, she had the education and background to understand this stuff, know it. And I grew up in the healthcare facility around all these kids that had all these different things, right?
Yeah.
And so I think both of our lens was just inherently different because, of course, we grieved the news, but then it was like, okay, great. Now we're aware, so we can be intentional with how do we move forward. Exactly. And we can wrap them with any and all services that are necessary to help them be as successful as possible. So, both kids have been in speech therapy. Both kids have been in occupational therapy for years, and they've made leaps and bounds. Yeah. My daughter, we ended up getting into a specialized hearing school to help fast track her to get basically ahead of the curve to be able to mainstream and really understand and process and do the things that she needs to do. But everybody has their own challenges. Everybody has their own issues. There's a very special place, I think. Again, I don't mean this from a necessarily religious context, but I don't know what else to call it sometimes.
Yeah.
There's a special place in the afterlife, in heaven, and in the universe, however you want to call it, for, I think, parents with special needs kids. Because, it's a whole different game.
Yeah.
And, the level of intentionality that you have to have in every moment to pay attention to anything and everything that's coming through to help them process, learn, adapt, that's different than how other kids learn and adapt, that you really start to focus in on the things that make them uniquely them and honor those things and help bring out the light in them. Yeah. And I'm one of those that also actually sees a lot of benefit to, for lack of a better term, labels, right? Or diagnoses or those types of things, because although many people might stray from them, again, they bring awareness to us. And I think that for kids early and often and young to be able to embed, like for my son, for example, hey, dude, you're on the autism spectrum. That makes you brilliant in lots of ways. It also means you've got different struggles that other people don't have. They've got struggles you don't have, right? Because we at least know what it is, we can be super intentional to help you learn how to overcome those things, how to make sure these aren't things that hold you back, how to make sure that you can find happiness and reduce anxiety and all those things, right? And for my daughter, what she desires more than anything is human connection, right? Fear of missing out is like something that totally runs her life. Well, we've used that to our benefit because hearing aids make her different. They make her stand out. They make her very aware that like she was missing a whole lot of things. So we've used that to benefit her, to teach our own little 5-year-old to embrace her own pain because she can be in a room and be isolated and not hear what's going on, but fit in because she doesn't have hearing aids, or she can wear her hearing aids and be an active part of the discussion, right? There's all these things that we've used to help both of our kids understand, hey, because of these things, life is going to look different for you.
Yeah.
We got to embrace the pains that are necessary to overcome those things so that you can live the life you want to live. And these don't have to define you. They're just a part of who you are. And so, you experience a lot of these things, I'm sure, in your own scenario.
Yeah. Of course,
And again, it's not to say that we have it harder. It's just different. And in some cases, we have to spend extra time on stuff that other parents don't. We have to reorganize our lives, our structures, the way that we operate in the world. Real-time example, I just told you what both my kids have. Virtual learning is really painful for them. On the autism spectrum, which is a social thing, it doesn't translate the same way over video.
No.
For hearing impaired, guess what? Sound quality is horrible for most video streaming services. She doesn't connect. So what does that require? My wife literally has to handhold my kids, both of them, through all of their learning right now.
Yeah. Is
that something we signed up for? No. Is it a pain that we're going to embrace because it's what's necessary to get our kids where they need to be? Absolutely. Yeah. Right? So that's our life, man. It's all about getting them in the best position possible to be who they are and have the tools they need to be successful in whatever they want to do.
I love that. And you're making it sound so natural, and I've embraced it very naturally as well. But we have to be realistic in the world where there's a lot of parents that don't embrace it the way we have. And I'll give you a little example. And this is obviously prior to the embracing and educating and reshifting what has to be reshifted or even reframing your mind in a way, right? It's when I was at Sick Kids Hospital with my son, he was in ICU, intensive care. It was the most intensive room on the 4th floor at Sick Kids Hospital. And there were 6 beds in there. And my wife and I would sit by my son's bed from 7 in the morning to like 7 at night, every single day, Monday to Sunday, 4 months. And 80% of the time during the week, we were the only parents in there usually. Yeah. And one day after about a month or so, I looked at one of the nurses, true story, and I actually put this in my book, but I looked at one of the nurses and said, where are all the other parents? Do they come like later on after work? Do they come when we leave? And she goes, honestly, a lot of parents do not want to get emotionally attached to their child because they know they're going to lose them. And I stood there and it was just mind blowing because I couldn't understand it. And this is the honest truth. And I took a big gasp and this nurse looked at me, and until this day, I get tears in my eyes when I think about it. She looked at me, she goes, your son's going to make it out of here because he knows you're here. And it's crazy because a lot of parents, Brian, do not take the time or the effort and just learn how to. It's not a mindset of why is my son like this? It's embracing and being like, I don't have to come home to help my son walk. I get to come home and help my son walk. Yeah. And reframing your mind. And they don't know how to do that shift. And that's like, it's almost like a purpose of mine. It's like, I want to help parents. I want to help dads reshift and understand what the meaning of being a father is. And I think as much as you're saying this and you make it sound so natural, I think we are still a very small minority when it comes to parents with children, with special needs or needs, whatever you want to call it, and don't understand. Like I take the physical part, but I also realize the mental part of my son. I have him in extra schools. I've spent hours and hours just handbrake.
I'm sure you have.
It's even just in general, like his right hand and his left hand. He had to learn how to do everything with his left hand, I said, and his right hand, originally we were trying to get his right hand to work in hours. We spent hours a day, just him pushing his finger into Play-Doh just to get the sensors working and stuff like that. Just the things we did from day one. And we went out and I took every extra help, just like you did, from speech therapies to every therapy we could get our hands on, we did. And I embraced it in the way where I'm the only one that could do this for him. And if I don't do it, no one's going to do it for him. And I had that in mind from day one is I do not want to be 60 years old looking at my 20-year-old and being like, God, I wish I did A, B, and C. He would have been so much. And I want, in my mind from day one, I said, I'm going to give him every single opportunity that I do not want to have any regret when I'm later on in my life. And a lot of parents don't embrace that. They just let the time go. They accept it. And they don't process it in the way that they can make a change. And when they do maybe process it, it's sometimes too late. Because I believe we have such a short window. I think it's up to 14 years old is such a crucial age. And I focused on that from day one. And I think a lot of parents, when their kid turns into high school and they start seeing at that age what a difference they are from other children, I think it's too late in the game to really make massive changes.
No, you're exactly right. 70 to 80% of who someone will be is formed by the time they're 7 or 8 years old.
Oh, 100%.
Right. And then 14 is another big window. And I couldn't agree with you more. And by the way, that's a big focus for me as well, right? Like when I talk about impacting 1 billion lives, it's about reducing the suffering on the planet. It's also about helping people realize like they can. Yeah. But I think what's also interesting in what you shared, and I'm going to share a different story because I do think it's phenomenal. I want to reinforce this point. Yeah. I'm speechless because I'm like processing this, man. That's sorry, I don't usually get speechless. It's crazy. When I was talking about my parents and how they're proud of themselves now, and you were like, I don't even think about that because it's for my kid, right? They didn't either.
Yeah.
They didn't see it as any other option. You never even viewed it as an option. You're like, this is of course what we're going to do. You never even thought about it. And the reason is you weren't thinking about yourself. You were thinking about your kid. And I don't mean this to make anybody who's listening feel badly if they fit into this bucket, but the parents I think that don't embrace it is because they're thinking about themselves, not about their kid. Because not being able to get emotionally attached is to protect themselves and the pain that they might have to go through. Not about giving their kid what they need to do, right? Not finding everything you need to do mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually to give him all the tools and the inconveniences that means for your life. You can just have it be passive. But if you let it be passive, it's because you're worried about you, not about your kid, right? And again, so I get the reason I had to pause there is I'm emotional when I say this because my son the other day, one of his biggest outlets and the thing that keeps him level for all of his symptoms, if you will, I hate to even call it that, but like the way that his autism manifests is to physical activity, right? It keeps him level. It keeps me level. And one of the big things he likes to do is run and bike. Mountain biking is a big thing. Biking is a big thing. So we ride bikes often together. And he said to me the other day, we were going through an intersection and I got ahead of him. And then I saw two different vehicles come around and I literally like stopped to block the traffic and I almost got hit. And he saw it and I wasn't scared or worried. I didn't even hesitate, didn't even think about it. And my son is, given his age, he's very insightful, asks really amazing questions, observes stuff. And he goes, Dad, he goes, why did you do that? Did you like, were you going to, these are literally the words he said, were you going to just sacrifice yourself for me? And I said, without hesitation. And he said, well, why? He's like, why would you do that? I said, dude, you're my son. Like, I want everything for you. And I said, literally, I would 10 out of 10 times take a bullet for you. Like, there's no hesitation. And he goes, did you even think about that? This is literally the conversation. I said, no, buddy, I saw the cars come up. I saw you right behind. I felt like you were exposed. I didn't even think about it. It just happened. And he goes, well, Dad, I want to make sure I can do that for you. I want to make sure that I can protect you and sacrifice you. And I said, here's the beautiful thing, buddy. You're always going to be my son, and I'm always going to do that for you. My dad still does that for me, right? I'm 35 years old. My dad still does that for me. The cool part is at some point, because you recognize that and see that, we're going to do that for each other. But I'm always going to be your dad, and you're always going to be my first priority, right? That's not how most people operate. Even though on the surface they might say it is. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back or the chest, but that was a real-time example where it's like, I literally would die for my kids if it meant they could have a better life. No hesitation. When our daughter got diagnosed with her hearing loss, the audiologist, this is what's fascinating about how many parents have conditioned her. She didn't tell us she had hearing loss, or all these things. She said, your daughter might be able to benefit from hearing aids. And I said, well, what do you mean she might be able to benefit? Like, what does that even mean? Right? And she said, well, like she would have better access to sound. I said, okay, so are you saying my daughter has hearing loss and that hearing aids is what you're recommending? And she goes, yes. And I said, why wouldn't you just say that? And she said, because most parents can't absorb it when I say it that directly. She said, most parents will deny it. Most parents will ignore it. Most parents will be like, well, she's been fine or he's been fine up until now. And then what's interesting is she has to get new ear molds, and we go into the audiologist regularly, and all the programming on the hearing aids, they can see all the data, number of hours a day worn, like how quickly batteries are wearing out, like, are they putting out the right frequencies? Are they they literally get a full data download. She said, what's really sad is even the ones who get hearing aids, I can tell that most of the time they're not even encouraging their kids to wear them because 90% of the time they're shut off. It aligns with everything you just said. And you're right. I don't even think about it. So I wasn't trying to make this a whole big thing. In fact, we went down a path I never expected to go down. But this is the case. It's also often how it can manifest into the world. Some of the issues that we have as societal constructs. People focus 100% about themselves and not necessarily about how this might impact other people. And if we could shift our lens on that, get clear on who we are, recognize that everything we do, everything we touch, every word we say, every action we take impacts other lives positively, negatively, or neutrally. It impacts people in some way. Which side do you want to be on?
I love that you're saying that. I'm going to give you a little story. And exactly what you're saying, as a parent, how you could impact positively and negatively through your actions without even understanding you are doing this to your children. I'll give you an example the other day. We were at a couple months ago, before we're going through a second lockdown here, but a couple months ago, we were at a baseball facility with my son, and he's a pitcher. We're doing indoor pitching and all this. And we had I had a radar gun, and we're just timing him and all this stuff. And there's these two kids there, and my son's 12 and they're like 15, 16. And they don't have baseball players. They just came in, they paid for the day pass, and they were using the batting cage and whatever. And they're like, "Oh, can we use your gun? We want to see how hard we can pitch." So they were on the other side, and I go, "Yeah, I take it." And they were coming back, and they're like, how'd you guys do? And one of them's like 15, 16-year-old kids are like, "Oh, we got 40, 41 miles an hour." And I just looked at them, I go, "My son, 12-year-old's got 54. And they're like, "Oh, that's awesome." And I just left, but that's not the story. So I just left. We get in the car, and my son's really quiet. It's my 12-year-old, and we're driving home, and I'm like, "T," I go, "Why are you so quiet for?" He goes, "Dad," he goes, "something's bothering me." I go, "What?" He goes, "Something you've taught me, and you did the opposite today, and it's really confusing me." I go, "What?" He goes, "Do you realize when you say that to those kids, you're actually putting them down?"
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, I was just like, "What?" And I looked at him, I go, "Pardon?" And he goes, "By you comparing me to them, you shouldn't compare people. You've taught me from day one that we're all different. Never compare yourself to no one else." And then you did that, and you made them feel inferior. And I'm like, this is my 12-year-old giving me this lesson.
Yeah,
I'm
look
like,
at the wisdom rolling out of him.
and I honestly, Brian, I just stood there, and I was like, I was driving home. I didn't even know, I was speechless. And I looked at him and go, "You're 100% right, and I apologize."
Yeah.
And I was just like, but how you impact your children, and you don't realize you do, and your actions lock in their heads. And that's also goes through, and this topic we're going to talk about is I want to dive into is even marriage, like how you react as a couple, your kids are absorbing, and you might not realize it. And we're going through a stage with a lockdown, and a lot of parents are home, and they're both working from home, and their children, like you said, homeschooling and virtual learning. A lot of things are being impacted. And I see through a lot of my social friends and close friends, how their relationships are shifting and changing, and it's impacting their children.
100%.
And it's something as parents have to realize that every single thing we do in front of our children are going to impact them, and in a positive way or in a negative way. And it's just, I just brought that up because it was something that was in the back of my head when you were talking about that, the positive and negative. It's so crucial. And sometimes we don't actually understand it. And a lot of children don't have the mindset to express themselves. And that's one thing I've done from day one with both our kids is I tell them to always express themselves. If they have something to say it. And that's why I talked to you before we went on air, is I called the 3 to 7 is I'm home every single night for dinner, because I find relaxed time around a meal is the time they're going to open up the most.
Yep.
And I love that aspect where you sit down and have a meal, and I enjoy just the comfort of food and talking and how's your day, and is anybody bothering you? This, and we just have open conversations.
Yeah.
And and to them, it's an open conversation. To me, it's me learning as much as I can about them and understand what's going on in their lives.
And seeing how their brains work and their emotions
100%.
work. And like you learn so much in those moments. So we do the same thing. That's another area you and I are aligned. I mean, that's one of the things I shifted. I'm home 6 to 7 days a week for dinner and bedtime. Yeah. Right. Now, it's not always 3 to 7, right? Mine's not quite as disciplined.
I try to do 3 to 7. Things obviously alter and change, but yeah, that's.
But the reality of it is 99% of the time, like I'm home for dinner and bedtime. And since the kids were babies, my wife and I have alternated kids for bedtime, and we literally both cuddle for 5 or 10 minutes with each kid each night, which we also get that meaningful conversation. I'm curious when you asked though, or when you were talking about that, we about a year ago started asking some like the same questions every night. We'll have open dialogue and open conversation, but we started having conversations. I'm curious if you do that. Give you an example of what I mean. We literally almost every single night at dinner, we talk about what was our favorite part of the day.
Yeah.
And what's one thing that I like about myself.
Yeah.
And we literally like have those conversations. We also have I am statements that we use with our kids before they go to school. And we'll talk about statements at dinner time as well. So it's like, what's something that you could make into an I am statement from today? Right. So we're trying to get them to just like really verbalize and do these things, but it's fascinating to see where they start to evolve, because we participate too. We answer the same questions in front of our kids. And we'll talk about like, what was the hardest part about our day, right? What's something that we're still holding on to from our day? Like we literally have these questions that prompt, and we try to get them to think about their thinking, feel their feelings, think about their feelings, and feel their thinking. And so we try to ask questions to get their holistic self, like connecting the dots on all that. We're not perfect.
It's funny you're saying that, because I actually utilize a very similar concept with myself when it comes to coaching. I call it on track program, which on a weekly basis, I have a certain amount of questions I ask every single week. and you have to write them down. And they're the same questions every week as accountability. And when it's goals, personal, fitness, and all these questions where it makes you think, it makes you react by writing them down, and it holds you accountable to learning about yourself. So I love that part of it. Yeah, that's very interesting.
But to the question that you started on with like the dinner thing, like marriage, relationships, like how do we handle all this stuff? What's interesting is today, as we're speaking, obviously this will be outdated by the time this episode goes live, but today we're literally dropping a piece of content that was a 25-minute on video discussion that my wife and I had about this exact question. Right. And it wasn't so much specific around like this time or the kids, but it was around this idea of like, hey, I've got something really strong at home. How do I chase my goals? Right. Without sacrificing that. And the reality of it is I could answer that question, but it's better because it's not me, it's both of us. Right. It's a partnership. And I think the way that we live in our house probably is not dissimilar from the way I hear you describing the way you interact with your kids. Yours are a little older than mine. But my wife and I kind of try to adopt the be the example philosophy. And I don't mean that like, let's show them all the good and only show them the good. Like we show them everything and we talk to them about it. And so 100%. What I mean by that is, look, we argue in front of our kids. We don't get into screaming matches in front of our kids, but we have disagreements. And there are times where one of us might walk out of the room, right? Yeah. There are times where we might get short on nerves or frustration and we might snap or do something unintentionally to either each other or to kids, right? We don't ever allow those things to happen without a follow-up conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Because we're not perfect, right? I'm human just like everybody else. I mean, I can come on here and talk about, all these great things we do with our kids. Yeah. Here's the deal. I screw up every day, every day. Right? I'll give you one example. And it was like really meaningful to my kid, but I didn't know how meaningful it was in a negative way. So the other day, he's being really creative in the moment, which by the way, sometimes is hard for people on the autism spectrum to do. And he's telling a story and it wasn't modeling. It wasn't framing. It wasn't like rehearsing. He was actually using his imagination and creating this story. Well, when either one of my kids tell stories, I'm bad and I probably should just be quiet and completely listen. But what I instead do is I'll ask them questions about their stories. So they might tell me like, a man was going down the sidewalk. And I'd be like, well, which side of the street was he on? Which direction was he walking? And I do that one, because I like to see how their brains work and how they quickly respond on the spot and where it helps develop the story. Yeah. 2, it's like really fun to see how it develops the story further. And 3, like I'm trying to be active and engaged. Yeah. Well, the other day I pushed it too far. I was still enjoying the moment, but I missed the signs. I wasn't listening and honoring what my son was telling me. And he was getting incrementally more frustrated. And he was like, Dad, stop. Right? And so then to show him it wasn't about him, my daughter told a story afterwards. I did the same thing and it was jovial and it was fun. He shut down though. And I could have just left it at that. And fortunately I saw it, but my wife also saw it. She's like, because he got up and he walked out of the room. So I went in and he was sitting on the couch, and the message he heard through my actions was, I'm not a good storyteller. And I didn't honor and respect what he was giving me feedback on throughout the moment. And so I was asking to him, I was extracting from him, like, what's going on? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Like, how did my actions just make you feel? Like literally, like, and I said, you're not going to hurt my feelings, buddy. Like, I want to know. Because the last thing I ever would do is intentionally hurt you, but I will accidentally hurt you in our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen. This is a perfect example. Right. And I'm just owning like, dude, I'm going to screw up. I screwed up. I'm going to screw up again in the future. But what it led to is it's like I was able to unpack for him why I do it that way. Well, that I like to see how his brain works, and I could give him the framing and the context on it. And I said, but that said, buddy, knowing that it bothers you, I'm going to make it a concerted effort to not ask you questions in your stories in the future. Or if I do and you tell me to stop, I'm going to really do my best to honor that in the moment. I can't promise you I'm going to be perfect. But buddy, like, can we work on this together? Because I want you to know I never want to upset you. I never want to hurt you, but let's have these conversations. So the reason I say that is like being the example, it's not just with each other, but it's with our interactions with our kids. Yeah. Right? Like had I not had the opportunity to notice that he walked away, my wife noticing as well, her encouraging me to just go have a conversation with him, he would have in his head believed that he's a bad storyteller on a time that he took a chance, took a risk to tell a story and was proud of himself. But my actions didn't make him feel that way. Totally unintentionally.
Yeah.
And so like we try to pay attention to all of those things that we can move into conscious awareness, that we can have active discussions about, so we can be intentional, not only as a couple and make sure that we're on the same page in communicating, but that our kids witness our screw ups, learn from our screw ups, and that we can have open, honest discussions about it. Because again, when we talk about intellect and mentality combined with heart set and feelings, that's what it's about. Like we have to have that dynamic, holistic dialogue. Otherwise, we're going to be passive and blind to so many things that could be potentially damaging to our kids.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, we're still going to damage our kids. It's a part of being a parent, right? Like, let's just be honest. Like, we can't be perfect.
It's crazy is there's so many. And as your children get, how old is your son?
He turned 7 in February.
Okay. So they're 2 years apart?
They're 17 months apart. Yeah.
17 months. Yeah. It's just pretty much like ours. So it's so crazy. There's so many things that go on a regular basis as a parent, and you just subconsciously shut them off and not realize them. And I'm going to give you a little example. My daughter, and it ended up being a great part of the story on her side, and it's just shows her character and the character she's built. And I guess we've built this into her. A few years back, this is going on to 1 year, 2 years. This is 1 year, 2 years. So 3 years back, give or take, she came to me. She's been doing dance her whole life, but she's only doing it not recreational. She was part of a club, but it was just once a week she would dance. Once a week she would do her practice, and then she would have year-end recital. It was nothing competitive. But she would come home and by herself in her room train every day. And I was just questioning. She loves it. Let her do it. She's a workout fanatic too. And 3 years ago, she came to me and she's like, Dad, she goes, I really want to try out for a competitive team. She goes, but competitive dance, I don't know if you know anything about it. It's a different world altogether.
It is.
It's so much time, so much effort. I don't even care about the financials, just the time and effort, right? And I said to her, I go, Sarah, it's a lot of time and effort. And she looked at me, she goes, Dad, she goes, I want to prove to you that I'm committed, but I also want you to understand something. And there's another aha moment. She looked at me, she goes, I realized for the last, whatever it was, 12 years or 11 and a half years, she goes, I realized that Tiago needed a lot of attention. And I've always wanted to do competitive, but I've never asked you because I realized that he needed more help. I feel like right now, he needed more help than I did. And she goes, I think he's at the age where he's doing so well. I think you can maybe allow me to do this now. And I stood there and I was just like, wow. So she looked at me, she goes, I'm not going to go full-time. She goes, I just want to prove to you guys how committed I am. She goes, I'll go part-time. And she goes, if I do really well in the 2 competitions, and then next year you'll allow me to try out for the full-time team. And obviously I said yes. So she tries out for the part-time team. She makes the team, does 2 competitions, wins platinum in both, wins first place in both competitions. So the next year comes along. And this is her work ethic. And this is another side of the story. So she comes to me, and the next year she's like, I want to try out for the full-time team. I go, you deserve it. You've done everything that you said you're going to do. You've proved it. So I let her try out for the team. Of course, she makes the team, the full-time team. She comes to me about a week later. She goes, Dad, Ontario-wise, province-wise, there's a high-performance team. She goes, it's going to be like 400 or 500 kids there. She goes, I'm not going to make it. It's $40 to try out. I just want to see how good these other dancers, I want to see at what level I am compared to them. She goes, so maybe in a couple of years I could try out. I go, you know what? Here, let's go. So I gave her the money. She went, she dropped her off. She did the tryouts. A week later, I get a phone call. She made the team.
Oh my goodness.
So, but listen to this crazy part. So I was just like shocked in 2 ways, positive and negative way. Negative way that it was 7 days a week of dance now. And it was just, it would take our schedules to another level. It was just like, wow. But the positive way was, I was so excited for her, like her hard work and everything she did. It's proving right now. And she did this on her own. She literally did this on her own. So I didn't want to tell her. And I asked you to have it as a post. So I told my wife, I go, we're not going to tell her. Let's just surprise her. So I want to do it. I want to surprise her because I was the one that took her and all this stuff. And I said to my wife, I go, let me have this moment with her. And she was like, yeah. So I took her to Starbucks. She loves going to Starbucks. We have a Starbucks right down the street. Went for a walk, went to a Starbucks. And I told the girl to write on the cup. She was sitting outside in the patio, and I said, right on the cup, you've made the SIP team, the high performance SIP team. So she's drinking her drink, and I go, Sarah, what's that written on your cup? She looks it over. She kept asking me all week, did you get a phone call? Did you get a phone call? I'm like, no, nothing. She looks at it and she reads it, and she just balls out and crying. And she looks at me, and I go, how proud am I of you? I go, look at what you've done. And I go, hard work. I go, you've done. And she looked at me. This is honest truth, Ryan. She goes, where do you think I learned my hard work from? I learned it from you. And I was just like, whoa.
Well,
How crazy is that?
Brother, like, here's the thing. So I think you've you've had me a combination of speechless, chills through my entire body, and on the verge of tears more in this conversation than probably any conversation I've had recently. Because again, I told you this when we first chatted, like we are more aligned than I think we even realized in this short period of time. Your kids are lucky to have you, period.
Appreciate
and
that.
So because you put so much focus on them, and I know that was like a complete shock for them or for you to hear her vocalize that. Yeah. She wouldn't have been able to communicate that to you if it was not for you and your wife and the way you're raising your kids, period. You enabled her to tell you, hey, I've put my stuff aside because I didn't want to have this be a focus, but I want to prove to you what I can do. Like, you did that. You and your wife did that. And I want that to sit inside your soul, because again, when you say, look, I don't celebrate, or I'm not proud of myself, or I don't think about that. What my wife and I are starting to do, and this is probably a lesson that I learned from my parents, it's easy to get stuck in focusing on the things that they need, right? It's easy to get stuck to like help develop and grow them. Look, we are super fortunate to have the kids that we have, because they're making us better parents, a better couple, better people, better the way that we communicate. But guess what? We also have to own the fact that our kids are really lucky to have us, because we're going to give them the tools they need to be successful. And to your point, we are in the fraction of a percentage that are going to invest time, energy, resources, all of ourselves to give them the tools to be able to communicate. Do you know how old is she now?
She's 14 now.
Okay, so call it 12 years old around the time this was happening.
Yeah.
How many 12-year-olds can communicate that stuff?
Oh, they can. No, that's why it was so shocking.
You know how many 6-year-olds can communicate what my son did to me?
Yeah.
Again, that's because of the way that we operate. And so I want you to own the fact that that's the case. You know, we also can guilt ourselves as parents, right? And I'm sure that when you heard that, it not only was empowering and motivating and confirmation that she could communicate it and you're going to honor her stuff. There's a sense probably that you probably felt a little guilty as well. It's like, oh gosh, we didn't even pay attention to that or notice that, like that she felt that way.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
We often, in the
100%.
very beginning, right? Yeah. We were so focused with our son and all he needed. It took us a while in the beginning to realize, like, we guilted ourselves. Like, how did we miss her hearing loss? Is it because we had so much attention on our son?
Yeah.
Right? Did she fall into the background? Was she just in the shadow? And the reality is that in some ways she was. In a lot of ways she wasn't. And we couldn't have picked it up any sooner.
Yeah.
But I want you to realize, like, the ability for your kids to communicate to you the way that they do is unique, extremely unique. And it's because of you two.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's
Own
awesome.
that, because it makes you even more powerful in your ability to influence their lives.
And this conversation has got, usually we talk a lot about business. This has been a very emotional, very such a great conversation.
Well, you know what? Maybe I'll come back for another time. We can talk about business, but this is exactly what needed to happen today. Because man, you and I are going to do stuff together for a long time. I know it already.
I love it. We
were brought into each other's lives for a reason. We have more alignment than I think you even realize in the moment. But brother, this is fun. This is where meaning happens, right? It. This is the stuff that if we could put business as secondary and have these conversations every day, business would be more successful. And that's part of what I do professionally, because so many people start with the what job, what house, what amount of money, what wife, what spouse, right? And they lose the who in the process.
Yeah. This
is the who. Yeah. When we can focus on the who, the what becomes a manifestation of the who. This is the stuff that matters.
I love it. We've been on for a little over an hour. We're gonna end it right there, and I'm gonna have you back on again. This is awesome. I truly enjoy this conversation. On our show notes, I'm gonna put all information how to hold of Brian, how to follow him on social media. Is there any plugs or anything you want to say to our audience? And there's one actually last question I'm gonna ask you before we can get into that. I always ask. None of my podcast is ever scripted. I just love having a free-flowing conversation. That's what I do.
It's the best kind, yeah.
But there's always one question I ask everybody at the end, and I think it's a powerful question that some people have heard before, some people have never actually put thought into it. If you were to pass today by your closest friends in a few words, how would you want to be remembered or described?
That they were better because I was in their life.
Perfect. I give, right? Like, but that would be it. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're a better that means a whole lot, right? Yeah. That I had an impact in their life and that they were better as a result of knowing me. I love it. Those are the most powerful, right? It's short and sweet. it's funny because a couple of weeks ago, one of my guests actually reverted that on me and asked me the question. And I'll be honest, even though I asked, I never put thought into it. And my natural reaction was, I want to be that person that everybody close to me always knew I had their back. Yeah. When they turned around and something was not going right in their lives, they could feel comfortable calling me, knowing that I would always pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And if you could have that and everybody would live with that mindset, I think this world would be a lot better of a place.
100% agree. 100%. I mean, that's a big part of what I'm about, is helping people realize that we have more in common than we have apart, right? And it's all about breaking down the boundaries that keep us separated, isolated, right? Or polarized or politicized even, right? And instead of being a bridge burner, what if we could all become bridge builders? So simultaneously break down the things that keep us apart, but also look for ways to bring us together. Man, it would. I love that. The world would look like a completely different place.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Where could our audience reach out to you or find you?
Yeah, brianbogert.com is probably the best place. It's where all my social handles integrate to. It's where a lot of the free content is out there. I said earlier, I'm on a mission to impact 1 billion lives, and that I'm aware that 99.999 will never pay me $1, right? And so to extend that, I also want to give a free offer. Go to nolimitprelude.com. There's a download that is a succinct version of a lot of our thought processes that built our coaching philosophies. So you might be able to get yourself there with just this. So if you don't know who you are, you think you know who you are, and you're well along the path to development, and you have no idea where to start, this will be a really powerful tool for you in your life.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I appreciate you. I appreciate our connection. A shout out to Chris Ross for introducing us.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's a long-term friendship happening here. So I love it. I appreciate you very much, brother.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I appreciate the platform you've built. I appreciate who you are, brother. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you even better.
Thank you so much, brother. That's a wrap for today. I want to thank our guest, Brian, for being such an amazing guest and taking time out of his pressing schedule to be a guest on the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. If you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, please tell your friends, tell your family, spread the word. We're trying to build something special here. Leave a review. I love spending the time reading the reviews. Until next week, guys, keep moving forward.